This is without question one of the most disturbing execution cases in the history of the United States. A mother's unthinkable decision that would shock an entire nation. On November 4, 1997, something happened inside a small apartment in Sherwood, Arkansas, that would forever change the definition of maternal love gone horrifically wrong. Christina Marie Riggs spent less than 2 years on death row before facing lethal injection. She became the first woman executed in Arkansas in over 150 years, and the youngest woman executed in modern U.S. history at just 28 years old. But what she did to her own children was so unforgivable, so incomprehensible, that even she couldn't live with it. The case you're about to hear contains deeply sensitive and distressing details. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. This is the complete story of Christina Riggs. November 4, 1997, started like any other Tuesday at Arkansas Heart Hospital. Christina Marie Riggs clocked in for her shift as a licensed practical nurse, a position she'd held for 2 years. To her colleagues, Christina appeared professional, dedicated, and reliable. She was known for her compassion toward patients and her attention to detail. But that afternoon, something was different. Around 3 p.m., Christina made several trips to the medication storage area. Security footage would later show her accessing morphine, potassium chloride, and other controlled substances. She carefully concealed these medications in her pockets and purse. Christina wasn't planning to return to work. In fact, she wasn't planning to see tomorrow at all. At approximately 4:15 p.m., she clocked out for the last time. None of her coworkers suspected anything unusual. She got into her car and drove directly to her mother's house. Carol Thomas, Christina's mother, had been watching her 2 grandchildren while Christina worked. 5-year-old Justin Thomas and 2-year-old Shelby Alexis were playing in the living room when their mother arrived. But Carol noticed something off about her daughter that afternoon. There was a heaviness in Christina's eyes, a distance in her voice. Carol later described it as a mother's intuition, a feeling that something terrible was approaching. "Is everything okay?" Carol asked. "Yes, Mom. Everything's fine," Christina replied, handing her mother some money she'd owed. She gathered the children, buckled them into their car seats, and drove the short distance back to their apartment. The clock was already ticking. Back at the apartment, Christina went through her normal evening routine. She prepared dinner, played with the children, and gave them baths. To anyone watching, it would have appeared like an ordinary evening with a loving mother caring for her kids. But Christina had already made her decision. Tonight, all 3 of them would die. Around 8 p.m., she began putting the plan into motion. She crushed several tablets of Elavil, a powerful antidepressant she'd stolen from the hospital, and mixed them into the children's bedtime snacks. Justin received his mixed into a piece of candy, his reward for being good. Shelby's was concealed in her food. The medication would make them drowsy, compliant, and less aware of what was about to happen. By 10 p.m., both children were sleepy and ready for bed. Christina tucked Justin into his bed and Shelby into her crib. She kissed their foreheads, adjusted their blankets, and told them she loved them. The children smiled, happy to see their mother so affectionate, completely unaware that these would be their final moments of consciousness. Christina sat in the living room, waiting. She needed the medication to take full effect before she could complete what she'd started. In her pocket were 2 syringes filled with potassium chloride, the same chemical compound used in lethal injection executions. Around 11 p.m., she entered Justin's room first. What happened next would become one of the most disturbing accounts in modern criminal history. Christina approached Justin's bedside with a syringe filled with potassium chloride. She had worked in healthcare long enough to know what this chemical does to the human body. When injected directly into the bloodstream, it stops the heart by disrupting the electrical signals that keep it beating. But Christina had made a critical error. She hadn't properly diluted the solution. As the chemical entered 5-year-old Justin's veins, his body reacted violently. His eyes snapped open. Confusion turned instantly to pain. Potassium chloride, when administered improperly, causes an intense burning sensation throughout the body, like fire racing through the bloodstream. Justin began screaming. He didn't understand what was happening. He only knew that his mother was hurting him, and the pain was unbearable. He kicked and thrashed, crying out for help that would never come. Christina panicked. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She grabbed another syringe, this time filled with morphine, hoping it would calm him down and ease his suffering, but it wasn't enough. Justin continued to fight, his small body convulsing as the chemicals worked through his system. His cries echoed through the small apartment. "Mama, no. Mama, please." In her desperation to end his suffering and her own panic, Christina grabbed a pillow. She pressed it firmly over Justin's face, using her full weight to hold it down. Justin fought with everything he had. His small hands scratched at his mother's arms. His legs kicked against the mattress. But a 5-year-old child is no match for an adult's strength. After what seemed like an eternity but was likely only minutes, Justin's body went still.
The amitriptyline I figured would help them sleep, so they wouldn't wake up and feel nothing. And the potassium chloride was supposed to stop their heart. No pain, no nothing, just... I don't think he knew. I think that the amitriptyline, he just kind of, whined, "Mama, Mama." After I laid Justin down in the bed, in my bed, I used a pillow and suffocated.
Christina lifted the pillow. Her son's eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. He was gone. But the night wasn't over. Christina walked down the hallway to Shelby's room. The 2-year-old was sleeping peacefully in her crib, still under the effects of Yellowville. She looked angelic, unaware of the tragedy that had just unfolded in the next room. Christina couldn't bring herself to use the injection again. Not after what she'd witnessed with Justin. The screaming, the fighting, the look of betrayal in his eyes. Instead, she lifted Shelby from her crib and held her close. She whispered that she loved her, that she was sorry, that they would all be together soon. Then she placed a pillow over Shelby's face. The toddler barely stirred. The medication kept her in a deep sleep as her oxygen supply was cut off. Within moments, Shelby stopped breathing. Both children were dead. Christina carefully carried their small bodies to her own bedroom. She laid them side by side on her bed, positioned them as if they were simply sleeping, and covered them with a blanket. She tucked it around them gently, almost lovingly. Then she sat at her kitchen table and wrote 3 farewell letters. The first was to her mother, Carol. Christina explained that she feared her children, who had different fathers, would be separated after her death. She wrote that she didn't want them growing up knowing their mother had taken her own life. The second letter was to her sister, and the third to her ex-husband, John Riggs. When the letters were finished, Christina prepared for her own death. She swallowed 28 tablets of Elavil, far beyond a lethal dose. Then she filled a syringe with the remaining potassium chloride and injected it directly into her arm. She collapsed beside the bed where her children lay, expecting to die within minutes. It was supposed to end there. All 3 of them together, peaceful, gone. But Christina Riggs didn't die. November 5, 1997. Carol Thomas woke with a terrible feeling she couldn't shake. She tried calling Christina multiple times throughout the morning, but there was no answer. By early afternoon, her worry had transformed into dread. At approximately 4 p.m., Carol drove to Christina's apartment. She had a key for emergencies. This qualified. When she opened the door, the apartment was silent. Too silent. No sounds of children playing, no television, nothing. "Christina?" Carol called out, no response. She walked down the hallway toward the bedrooms. That's when she found them. In Christina's bedroom, two small figures lay motionless on the bed, tucked in as if sleeping. But something was wrong. They were too still, their skin an unusual color. And on the floor beside the bed lay Christina, unconscious but breathing. Carol's screams could be heard by neighbors. She immediately called 911. "My grandchildren, they're not breathing. My daughter, she's on the floor. Please hurry." Police and paramedics arrived within minutes. EMTs immediately recognized that both children were beyond help. They'd been dead for hours, their bodies already showing signs of rigor mortis. But Christina was alive, barely. Her pulse was weak, her breathing shallow, but she was still fighting for survival despite her best efforts to die. Paramedics loaded her into the ambulance and rushed her to Baptist Memorial Hospital. By 5:30 p.m. doctors had pumped her stomach and stabilized her vitals. Against all odds, Christina Riggs was going to survive. Back at the apartment, detectives began processing the scene. They found syringes, empty medication vials, traces of morphine and potassium chloride, and 3 handwritten letters that explained everything. The puzzle pieces fell into place quickly. This wasn't a random tragedy or an accident. It was a planned murder, followed by an attempted ending that failed. Detectives immediately contacted the hospital with clear instructions: no visitors were to see Christina Riggs. She was now the primary suspect in a double homicide. But her family acted fast. Shortly after midnight, they retained an attorney who immediately called the police department with explicit instructions: "Do not question my client without my presence." The police ignored the request. On the morning of November 6, 2 detectives entered Christina's hospital room. They read her Miranda rights, activated their recording device, and began asking questions. Christina didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't refuse to talk. Instead, in less than 8 minutes, she confessed to everything. She described how she'd stolen the medications from the hospital. How she'd crushed the Elavil and given it to her children. How she'd injected Justin with potassium chloride and watched him suffer. How she'd used a pillow to finish what the injection had started. She explained that she'd originally planned for all 3 of them to die together peacefully, but that everything had gone wrong. "I never meant for them to suffer," she told detectives, her voice flat and emotionless.
Chloride was supposed to stop their heart. No pain, no nothing, just... I don't think he knew. I think that the amitriptyline, he just kind of...
"I just wanted us all to be together." The confession was recorded in full. Every detail, every admission, in Christina's own words. By the end of the day, Christina Marie Riggs was officially charged with 2 counts of capital murder. The death penalty was on the table from the beginning. When she appeared before the judge for her initial hearing, something unexpected happened. Despite the overwhelming evidence and her own confession, Christina entered a plea of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. Her attorneys would argue that she wasn't a cold-blooded killer. She was a broken woman who'd lost her mind. But the prosecution saw something entirely different. They saw calculation, planning, and a mother who'd decided her children were better off dead than alive without her. The battle lines were drawn. The question wasn't whether Christina had done it. Everyone knew she had. The question was why, and whether that why mattered at all. The trial of Christina Marie Riggs began in early 1998, just months after the deaths of Justin and Shelby. The courtroom in Pulaski County was packed with media, spectators, and family members from both sides. The prosecution's case was straightforward and devastating. They presented the confession tape, the letters Christina had written, the physical evidence from the apartment, and testimony from medical examiners who detailed exactly how the children had died. There was no dispute about the facts. Christina had done it. She admitted it. The question before the jury was whether she understood what she was doing, whether she knew it was wrong, and whether mental illness should be considered in sentencing. The defense presented a portrait of a woman who'd been broken by life long before that terrible night. They brought in psychiatrists who testified that Christina suffered from severe clinical depression, that she'd been experiencing suicidal ideation for months, and that her judgment was severely impaired. Christina's childhood history became central to the defense strategy. She testified about being physically and emotionally mistreated as a child. At age 14, she'd already begun self-medicating with alcohol and marijuana. By 16, she was pregnant for the first time and gave that baby up for adoption, a trauma she never fully processed. Defense psychiatrists explained that Christina had developed a distorted worldview where she believed her children would be better off dead than living without her. She convinced herself that no one else wanted them, that Justin's ADHD made him too difficult, that Shelby would be abandoned. They pointed to her work history as a nurse near the Oklahoma City bombing site in 1995, arguing that the trauma of treating bombing victims had contributed to her mental decline. Christina herself took the stand. She spoke softly, often crying, describing her thought process that night. "I kept thinking, who's going to take care of them when I'm gone? My mom was exhausted. The daycare complained about Justin. His father wasn't around. John had been abusive. In my mind, nobody wanted them. I thought the kindest thing I could do was take them with me so they wouldn't suffer." But the prosecution painted an entirely different picture. They brought witnesses who testified that Christina had been seen at bars, singing karaoke and drinking, sometimes leaving her children locked in their room. They presented evidence that she'd been dating and socializing, suggesting she viewed her children as a burden to her freedom. They argued that this wasn't mental illness. It was selfishness wrapped in a thin disguise of maternal concern. She didn't want to die alone, the prosecutor argued. So she decided to take 2 innocent children with her. She had the medical knowledge to do it efficiently. She planned it. She executed it. And when one of her children fought back and screamed for mercy, she smothered him with a pillow. That's not insanity. That's murder. The jury deliberated for several hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on both counts of capital murder. Then came the sentencing phase, where the defense would traditionally fight hardest to save their client's life. But something unexpected happened. Christina stood up in court and addressed the judge directly. "I don't want life in prison. I don't want appeals. I want the death penalty. I want to die. I want to be with my babies." Her attorneys tried to intervene, but Christina was adamant. She instructed them to stop fighting. She wanted the harshest possible punishment. The judge granted her request. Christina Marie Riggs was sentenced to death by lethal injection. She was transferred to the McPherson unit in Newport, Arkansas, home to the state's female death row inmates. There, she would wait as her execution date approached. But unlike most death row inmates who spend years or decades filing appeals, Christina did something almost unheard of. She waived every appeal available to her. She refused to fight. She told her attorneys she wanted to die as quickly as possible. "I took my babies' lives," she said in a prison interview. "Now I want to give mine. It's the only thing left I can do." Within 2 years of her conviction, all legal avenues had been exhausted, not because the courts had rejected them, but because Christina herself had refused to pursue them. Her execution date was set for May 2, 2000. May 1, 2000. Christina Marie Riggs spent her final full day alive in a holding cell at the Cummins unit in Grady, Arkansas, where the state's execution chamber was located. According to prison protocols, she was monitored constantly but allowed certain privileges. She could have visitors if she chose. She could make phone calls. She could request a final meal. Christina declined to see anyone. No family members. No friends. No spiritual advisors. She spent most of the day alone, writing in a journal and reading. At 6 p.m., 12 hours before her scheduled execution, prison officials asked for her final meal request. Christina chose a large supreme pizza with extra cheese, a garden salad, fried pickled okra, strawberry shortcake, cherry lemonade. The meal arrived around 7:30 p.m. According to witnesses, she ate most of it but left some of the pizza untouched. She seemed calm, resigned, almost at peace with what was coming. At 8 p.m., she was visited by the prison chaplain, though she declined any formal religious services. They spoke briefly. Christina expressed remorse for what she'd done but reaffirmed that she wanted to proceed with the execution. "I'm ready," she told him. "I've been ready since the day I woke up in that hospital." At approximately 8:30 p.m. on May 2, 2000, Christina was escorted from her holding cell to the execution chamber. She was wearing prison-issued clothing and appeared calm. She didn't resist. She didn't ask for a delay. The execution chamber at Cummins Unit is a small, clinical room. In the center sits a gurney with leather restraints. On one wall is a window where witnesses sit, separated by glass. Among those witnesses were family members of Christina, representatives from the district attorney's office, media witnesses, and prison officials. Christina was instructed to lie down on the gurney. Prison staff began strapping her arms, legs, and torso to the table. Then came the most difficult part, finding a suitable vein for the 4 lines. Christina had been a nurse. She knew how executions worked. She knew they would need good venous access to administer the 3-drug protocol. But finding a vein proved difficult. For nearly 15 minutes, medical personnel attempted to insert 4 lines into Christina's arms. Each failed attempt caused visible discomfort, but Christina remained silent and cooperative. Finally, they located a usable vein in her right arm and successfully inserted the catheter. At 9:10 p.m., the warden asked if Christina had any final words. She turned her head toward the witness window and spoke clearly. "There are no words to express how sorry I am for taking the lives of my babies. There is no way to make up for or erase the pain I've caused to everyone who knew and loved them. Now I can be with my babies, just as I always intended." She paused, tears streaming down her face, and added, "I love you, my babies." Those were her final words. At 9:12 p.m., the execution began. The first drug, sodium thiopental, was administered. This is a barbiturate designed to render the person unconscious. Within seconds, Christina's eyes closed. The second drug, pancuronium bromide, was then administered. This paralyzes the muscles, including the diaphragm, preventing breathing. Finally, potassium chloride, the same chemical Christina had used on her own children, was introduced into her system. It stopped her heart. At 9:28 p.m., Christina Marie Riggs was pronounced dead. She was 28 years old. She became the first woman executed in Arkansas since 1845, and remains the youngest woman executed in the United States during the modern era of capital punishment. The case of Christina Riggs continues to generate debate more than 2 decades later. On one side are those who believe she was a deeply mentally ill woman who should have received treatment, not execution. They point to her history of depression, childhood trauma, and the fact that she ultimately wanted to die, making her execution essentially state-assisted completion of what she'd originally intended. On the other side are those who believe that mental illness, however severe, cannot excuse the premeditated murder of 2 innocent children. They argue that Christina had opportunities to seek help, that she consciously chose to steal medications and plan the deaths, and that Justin's suffering as he fought for his life demonstrated a level of cruelty that goes beyond mercy. What's particularly haunting about this case is Christina's own desire to die. Unlike most capital defendants who fight their sentences, she actively pursued her own execution. Some view this as the ultimate expression of remorse. Others see it as further evidence of mental illness. The children, Justin Thomas and Shelby Alexis Riggs, are buried together in Arkansas. Their grandmother, Carol Thomas, who discovered their bodies that terrible day, has rarely spoken publicly about the case. The question that haunts many who study this case is simple but profound. Could this have been prevented? Were there warning signs that were missed? Could intervention have saved 3 lives instead of taking them? We'll never know the answer. What we do know is that on November 4, 1997, 2 children went to sleep believing they were safe and loved, and they never woke up. And on May 2, 2000, the woman who took their lives paid the ultimate price. Was justice served in the case of Christina Marie Riggs? Some believe she was a victim of untreated postpartum depression and mental illness who needed help, not execution. Others believe there is simply no excuse for what she did, and that the death penalty was the appropriate response to such a horrific crime. I want to hear your thoughts. Drop your opinion in the comments below. If you found this case as compelling and tragic as I did, please hit that like button. It helps this content reach others who are interested in true crime cases that shaped legal and ethical debates. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into the most significant criminal cases in history. And if you want to continue down this rabbit hole, check out the case I covered last week in the card above. It's another execution case that divided the nation. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. On November 2, 1984, at precisely 2:15 a.m., North Carolina executed a 52-year-old grandmother who had become one of America's most prolific serial poisoners. Velma Barfield's final 24 hours would reveal a woman caught between profound religious transformation and the unforgivable weight of her crimes. This is one of the most disturbing cases in American criminal history, not because of the brutality of her methods, but because of who she was. A soft-spoken grandmother, a born-again Christian, and a cold-blooded killer who poisoned at least 6 people, including her own mother. What drives someone to murder those closest to them? And can genuine redemption exist when the bodies pile up in your wake? This is Criminal Folder. Kindly subscribe and turn on the notification never to miss our deep dive drops. This is the story of Velma Barfield, the woman who would become the first female executed in the United States in 22 years. Stuart Taylor loved Velma Barfield, the tobacco farmer from Lumberton, North Carolina, had proposed marriage to the pleasant woman who had nursed him back to health. She was everything he wanted, caring, devoted, deeply religious, but on February 3, 1978, Stuart Taylor began vomiting violently. His symptoms were relentless: nausea, severe stomach cramps, respiratory distress. Within hours, he was dead at age 56. The death certificate initially listed gastroenteritis as the cause. It seemed like a tragic but natural death. Velma grieved publicly, attended his funeral, and collected on his life insurance policy. But Stuart's family couldn't shake their suspicions. His sudden illness, the rapid deterioration, the timing, it all felt wrong. They pushed for an autopsy. What toxicologists discovered in Stuart Taylor's system would crack open one of North Carolina's most chilling murder investigations: arsenic, massive quantities of it. Detective Phil Wilson of the Robeson County Sheriff's Department was assigned to the case. As he began interviewing Velma, inconsistencies emerged in her story. She claimed Stuart had been sick for days, but medical records showed he was healthy just before his death. Then came the prescription fraud charges. Investigators discovered Velma had been forging prescriptions for tranquilizers and painkillers, drugs she was addicted to following a car accident years earlier. She needed money to feed her addiction. Under interrogation, Velma's carefully constructed life began to collapse. On March 3, 1978, she confessed to killing Stuart Taylor with arsenic-laced beer and food. She claimed it was to cover up the theft of money she had taken from him to buy pills, but Detective Wilson suspected this wasn't her first victim. As investigators dug deeper, a horrifying pattern materialized. Velma Barfield had left a trail of bodies stretching back years. Her mother, Lily Bullard, died in 1974 after a sudden illness that doctors attributed to natural causes. Exhumation revealed arsenic poisoning. Velma had poisoned her own mother, twice. The first attempt failed, the second succeeded. Dolly Edwards, an elderly woman Velma cared for as a live-in nurse, died in 1977, cause of death, arsenic poisoning. John Henry Lee, another elderly patient under Velma's care, died in 1977, arsenic. Record Lee, John Henry's wife, also died under Velma's watch in 1977. Investigators reopened the cases of her 2 previous husbands. Thomas Burke, her first husband, died in 1969 when their house mysteriously caught fire while he slept. The fire was ruled suspicious, but no charges were filed. Jennings Barfield, her second husband, died in 1971 from what doctors diagnosed as heart complications. His body was never exhumed, but the circumstances mirrored her other victims. Sudden illness, rapid decline, death. Velma Barfield wasn't just a murderer, she was a serial killer who had used her position as a caregiver to systematically poison vulnerable people, including members of her own family. The death toll, at least 6 confirmed victims, possibly more. Velma Barfield's trial began in November 1978 in Elizabethtown, North Carolina. She was charged only with the murder of Stuart Taylor, though prosecutors made clear they believed she had killed many more. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Arsenic in Taylor's system, Velma's access to rat poison containing arsenic, her financial motive, and her own confession. Her defense team argued diminished capacity due to drug addiction. Velma had been dependent on prescription medications for years following injuries from a car accident. Her lawyers claimed the drugs impaired her judgment and decision-making, but the jury saw through the defense. The premeditation was undeniable. She had purchased the poison, administered it repeatedly over days, and watched Stuart Taylor suffer. On December 2, 1978, the jury found Velma Barfield guilty of first-degree murder, and 3 days later, they sentenced her to death. Velma was transferred to North Carolina's Central Prison in Raleigh, housed in a specially designated death row unit for women, though she was the only female inmate there. Something unexpected happened during her 6 years on death row. Velma Barfield found religion. She had grown up in a religious household, attended church regularly, and considered herself a Christian, but on death row, she experienced what she described as a genuine spiritual awakening. She spent hours each day reading scripture, praying, and attending chapel services. She began ministering to other death row inmates, writing letters of encouragement, and even counseling prison guards going through personal struggles. Reverend Hugh Hoyle became her spiritual advisor. He believed her transformation was authentic. "I saw a real change in her," he later said. She wasn't the same woman who committed those crimes. Velma wrote extensively about her faith, her remorse, and her crimes. She took full responsibility for what she had done, never attempting to minimize the suffering she caused, but questions remained. Was her religious conversion genuine? Or was it a calculated strategy to avoid execution? As her execution date approached, Velma's case became a national controversy. Her supporters argued that she had been genuinely transformed, that she posed no threat to society, and that her execution would serve no purpose beyond revenge. Religious leaders, including Billy Graham's daughter Ruth Graham Lotz, advocated for mercy. Opponents countered that her crimes were too heinous to forgive, that she had murdered vulnerable people who trusted her, and that justice demanded her execution. Governor James Hunt faced immense pressure from both sides. North Carolina hadn't executed anyone since 1961. If he allowed Velma's execution to proceed, she would be the first woman executed in the United States since 1962. On October 30, 1984, just 2 days before the scheduled execution, Governor Hunt held a clemency hearing. Velma's lawyers presented testimony about her transformation, her ministry work, and her remorse, but the families of her victims also testified. They spoke of their loss, their pain, and their belief that Velma Barfield should pay with her life for what she had done. Governor Hunt denied clemency. The execution would proceed. November 1, 1984, Central Prison, Raleigh, North Carolina. Velma Barfield had less than 24 hours to live. At 10:47 p.m., prison logs recorded that she lay down in her cell. A guard assigned to maintain constant observation sat outside, watching her through the bars. "You okay?" The guard asked softly. "Yes," Velma murmured, rolling over. Within minutes, she was asleep. It seemed impossible. How could someone sleep soundly knowing they would die the next day? But Velma later explained it simply. "I barely slept the night before, I was exhausted." At 6:04 a.m. on November 2, Velma stirred, she coughed, sat up, and asked the guard for hot water to make instant coffee. "I really slept well," she remarked with a faint smile. "Must have been because I barely slept the night before." She even chuckled at the irony. Coffee in hand, she opened her worn Bible and began reading. Over the past 6 years, she had nearly memorized entire passages. Scripture had become her anchor. At 8:43 a.m., guards arrived. She was handcuffed and escorted to the inmate shower for what prison protocols called pre-visit hygiene. She removed her hair rollers, setting her hair neatly. A guard noted in the log, "Appears very calm." Visits were scheduled from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Velma had requested time with family, her lawyers, and her pastor. As she walked down the corridor toward the visiting area, a correctional officer stepped forward holding a bright yellow chrysanthemum from the prison chapel. "Mrs. Barfield," he said, "this is from the men of Central Prison, a small token of their love and concern for you today." Guards hesitated, unsure whether to allow it, but when Velma reached out, they didn't stop her. "Thank them for me," she said quietly, cradling the flower. At 11:37 a.m., Reverend Hugh Hoyle arrived. Velma had been looking forward to this visit for months. It was the first time since Christmas they had seen each other in person. She rose to greet him, her smile warm and genuine, but Reverend Hoyle carried devastating news. "Velma," he said, taking her hand, "I just heard your last appeal was turned down." She looked away briefly, then returned her gaze, composed. "Well, that's what I figured," she said softly. "Is there anything at all, that's left unconfessed?" Hoyle asked. "No, brother," she replied, "I'm ready to go." At 12:15 p.m., lunch arrived, pea soup with crackers and a cup of fruit punch. Velma ate quietly while flipping through a fresh stack of mail and telegrams. Letters of support had poured in from across the country, some praised her faith, others condemned her crimes. She read each one carefully. "Don't worry about me," she told the chaplains present. "Focus on the 39 men still on death row, they need you more than I do." The final hours of visiting time, from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., were reserved for Velma's children, Ronnie and Pam. As soon as Pam entered the room, she collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Ronnie stood nearby, struggling to maintain composure. Velma, calm despite everything, wasn't focused on her impending death. Instead, she gave final instructions. "Take care of your sister," she told Ronnie. "Handle the funeral arrangements. Remember the good times we had." When the visit ended, the goodbye was excruciating. Pam refused to let go. It was Ronnie who gently pulled her away. As they left, Ronnie whispered, "Don't look back," but Pam couldn't help herself. She turned and saw her mother one last time, standing still, watching them leave. Back in her cell, Velma's composure finally cracked. Alone, she allowed herself to grieve. At 6:13 p.m., she ordered cheese puffs and a Coke from the prison commissary. When the items arrived 30 minutes late, she also requested a pen and 2 small white Bibles. She set the snacks aside and picked up the pen. For the next hour, she wrote heartfelt messages in the Bibles, her fingers dusted orange from the cheese puffs, a detail prison logs recorded with clinical precision. At 7:15 p.m., guards escorted her to meet her lawyers one last time. Each held a rose, their smiles were strained. They spent over an hour together in an intensely emotional farewell. Velma had agreed to the final appeals not for herself, but because she knew how much it meant to them. Richard Burr, one of her attorneys, would later reflect, "Velma was my first death penalty case and I had a terrible sense of failure. I was crying, telling her how sorry I was." At 11:30 p.m., Chaplain Phil Carter entered her cell. He later admitted he was nervous, afraid he might fail to offer the comfort she needed, but Velma wasn't thinking about herself. She spoke only of others, her children, her lawyers, the warden, even the execution team. "That's all she talked about," Carter recalled. At 1:45 a.m. on November 2, 1984, the final preparations began. Velma changed into pink pajamas. Her final request, a diaper, was added as a grim practicality. A stethoscope and heart monitor were taped to her chest. Catheters were inserted into her arms. Saline drip began flowing. At 1:57 a.m., she was wheeled into the execution chamber on a gurney. Her body and legs were secured with thick straps. 3 syringes were attached to the 4 lines, each operated by a different volunteer. One line was a dummy, ensuring none of them would know if they had delivered the fatal dose. Witnesses gathered behind the glass, reporters, prosecutors, victims' family members, and anti-death penalty advocates. The warden approached. "Do you have any final words?" Velma spoke calmly, her voice steady. I want to say that I am sorry for all the hurt that I have caused. I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry. I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years. At 2 a.m., the warden gave the signal. The first drug, sodium thiopental, induced unconsciousness. The second, pavulon, paralyzed her respiratory system. The third, potassium chloride, stopped her heart. At 2:15 a.m., Velma Barfield was pronounced dead. 10 minutes after her death, Velma's body was removed in a waiting ambulance. Outside Central Prison, crowds had gathered, some holding signs demanding justice, others praying for mercy. Her execution reignited the national debate over capital punishment. Was justice served? Or had the state simply committed legalized murder? Velma Barfield's case remains one of the most controversial executions in American history. Her supporters believe her transformation was genuine, that she died a changed woman. Her critics argue that no amount of faith can undo the suffering she caused. 6 confirmed victims, possibly more, a grandmother who poisoned those who trusted her most, and in the end, the question remains, can someone who has taken so many lives truly be redeemed? What do you think? If your mother, sister, or daughter was convicted of crimes like these, would you still visit them in their final hours? Does genuine transformation matter when the crimes are unforgivable? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. This case challenges everything we believe about justice, mercy, and redemption. If this story affected you, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more deep dives into true crime's most complex cases. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones we never suspect.